Hi, I'm Dr. Daniel Amen. I'm here with my beautiful wife, Tana.
And we're so happy to be sharing this information. If you watched the last video, then you know that this is very personal to us. And we're so excited to be sharing our strategies for healing ADD with you.
Well, what we're really excited about is there's some very simple things you can do to really feel better fast. I mean, the first thing is like, okay, I have ADD. So it's admitting that you have it. The hallmark symptoms, again, short attention span, distractibility, disorganization, procrastination, some problems with impulse control, but like you said, not everybody has all of them. And then it's really knowing what your type is so that we can target help specifically for you.
Right, and so when you see this list, I mean, it's just a checklist, but think about the impact it has on your life. Because if you're watching this video, there's a reason. So distractibility, impulse control, those things, they devastate lives. Think about it. If you're not following through at work, if your kids aren't following through in school and they're failing, these things ruin people's lives. Impulse control ruins relationships, sex addiction. So wherever you're starting, whatever is going on with you, if it's leading to depression, if it's leading to, being fired and having to start new jobs all the time, whatever it is, or if you're just not reaching your potential, the exciting thing is you don't have to stay there. We see people's lives transformed every day. And all of a sudden they come in so excited because they're reaching their potential. We had one guy send us this email that was hysterical. And it starts off with, this is the confirmation number for my rental vehicle. I was like, what? It was so weird.
And then this was the confirmation number for my hotel.
And I'm like, what is he doing?
Why I know that is that since I've been doing the things that you asked me to do, my memory is crazy good.
Oh, and by the way, my relationship is great and my sex life is amazing. So
it's so exciting. I mean, that's what Tana and I live for, the stories of transformation. When you have ADD, you're not lazy, crazy, or stupid. Your frontal lobes might not work right, or it may be another area of your brain that can be balanced. And when your brain is better balanced, your energy is better, your memory is better, your focus is better, your relationships and work are better. Virtually everything is better in your life. We've seen children go from D's and F's to A's and B's to be much more focused, much happier. We've seen other ones running away from home, not going to school, to all of a sudden being
cutting
just excellent
themselves.
Students. Yeah, one of my favorite stories is of a girl who, she just got out of a psychiatric hospital. She'd been cutting herself. She was running away. She had suicidal thoughts.
Sad.
And when we looked at her, she really had untreated inattentive ADD, and just by treating it effectively, her grades went up. She's been consistent.
And one of my favorite parts is that this girl was so talented, and when she sent you a song that she had written that was just beautiful, I mean, she would have never reached that potential, and that's what's so exciting. And what bothers me is, one of the things that bothers me about dealing with ADD is the stigma around it. So as somebody who has it, it runs rampant in my family. I hate that there's this stigma and people don't want to get treated because, oh, it's a psychiatric issue or it's a brain issue. I'm a nurse. So if you had a heart issue or you had some other issue, your knee hurt or whatever was going on, you wouldn't think twice about getting it treated and going on with your life. This is so much more important. This is so much bigger because it's the difference between success and failure. So it's...
Well, and having lived ADD, so you certainly know about it, and you know about what it's like to have it in your family. I have several children who have ADD, so I know a lot about it, but I'm also a double board certified psychiatrist at Amen Clinics. We've literally seen tens of thousands of people who have ADD. We have thousands of transformational stories, which make us really excited. We have the world's largest database of brain functional functional brain scans. We do a study called SPECT that looks at blood flow and activity. So we have the world's largest database, and what we learned is ADD is not one thing. I mean, we have to sort of stop thinking, oh, you have ADD, here, take Ritalin or take Adderall or Vyvanse, because those help some people, but they make other people much
now,
worse.
The people that they work really well for, so we want to make that clear. But whatever the treatment is for you, think of it like glasses for your brain. You wouldn't withhold glasses from yourself or your child, and the treatment isn't always stimulants, so you don't have to worry and think, oh, I don't want to take them. It's not always stimulants, but if it is, and it makes a radical change in that person's life, it's like glasses for your brain. It's like razor sharp focus, almost instantaneously, whatever the treatment is.
Well, and we are absolutely not opposed to medication. But what we are opposed is to indiscriminate medication without you knowing what your type is. And I think medicine-only treatment is bad treatment.
Right.
That there's so many other things you can do.
Natural.
From diet, exercise, simple supplements, behavioral strategies that can just make a huge difference. But what we want to do in this video are two things. We actually want to go back through the 7 types and show you scans of the different types. And then we're going to talk about some of the myths and misconceptions about ADD. So when I first started doing imaging, it was 1991, and there already was 2 types described in the medical literature. So what I call classic ADHD and inattentive ADD or ADHD. And quite frankly, I don't really like the term ADHD, which is why you'll hear me bounce back and forth. The original term in 1980 was attention deficit disorder with or without hyperactivity. I really like that. But in 1987, a bunch of doctors got together and they changed the name to ADHD, and I hated that. Why? Because it highlighted the hyperactive component when clearly half the people never had it.
That's me.
And so that confusion was a mistake, but rather than people say, oh, I'm sorry, we made a mistake, they changed the name yet again in 1994 to AD/HD, highlighting half the people never had it, and I'm like, well, that's just stupid. But either way, so type 1 is classic ADHD, short attention span, distractibility, disorganization, procrastination, problems with impulse control, plus they're hyperactive, restless, impulsive, can't sit still, go to movies really hard for them because after 15 minutes they want to get up, be in a movie or be in a meeting, that's really hard for them because they can't sit still. Now as little kids, the hyperactivity is easy to see because you just can't corral them. One of my children, Caitlin, who I love dearly, I mean, she was just hard for me.
Okay, didn't you say you used to tie her shoelaces together in her stroller?
So whenever I would go to the mall, you've seen children on little yellow leashes. But I wrote a column in the local newspaper where I lived, and so whenever I went to the mall, people recognized me, and they, oh, you're Dr. Amen. And I just couldn't deal with it. You're Dr. Amen, why is your child on a leash? I mean, I couldn't deal with that. So what I used to do with Caitlin is put her in her stroller and tie her shoes together so she couldn't get out. And she was furious at me. But she was a child in the grocery store, always went in the basket. Where her older sister, Brianne, who wasn't hyperactive at all, I mean, she'd hold my hand, she'd stay right next to me. I never worried about her. Caitlin, as soon as you let her go, boom! I'm like, where are you going? I mean, it was so stressful for me. I think I still have PTSD because her first child, Liam, is exactly the same way. It's just like this stuff runs in families that you can see. So that's classic ADD. And what we see with classic ADD is when people try to concentrate, they get decreased activity in the front part of their brain. What does that mean? The harder they try, the worse it gets. And that type responds to stimulants or stimulating
So are you
supplements.
one of those people who grew up hearing, just try harder? Think about that, how frustrating that is.
Or where are you going? Right. Where are you going?
Why can't you sit still?
Sit still. And you get in trouble because you just had the wiggles. There's actually a Yiddish term for it. It's called Spielkiss. Or it means ants in the pants. It's like, do you have ants in the pants? Type 2 is very interesting and not diagnosed that commonly. It's what we call inattentive ADD. So short attention span, distractibility, disorganization, procrastination, not terribly impulsive, never hyperactive. In fact, they can be hypoactive. What we see in scans is lower activity at rest, and it gets worse with concentration.
Now, the scary part about that one, what I've learned from you, is that it's often not diagnosed.
Right. And more common in girls, not diagnosed.
Because
People
they don't
are saying,
misbehave.
try harder. Oh, he's an underperformer. He's a space
Or not
cadet,
that smart.
Or he's not that smart, or she's not that smart. And it often gets ignored. People just think these children or adults, they're not motivated. They don't care. And they never live up to their potential. Type 3, which I think I was the first one to describe, which was really interesting, is called overfocused ADD. The problem is not so much they can't pay attention, it's they can't shift their attention. It's like they have this little mouse on an exercise wheel in their head and the mouse just can't get off. And if you get stuck on something, like I said, something that irritated you and you think about it over and over and over again, well, you can't pay attention because you're always stuck in the past. And what I discovered, it's common in children and grandchildren of alcoholics. That was a major area of research for me when I was a young psychiatrist. It's, well, if you grew up in an alcoholic home, what kind of characteristics does that give you, and how does it affect your children?
Is it because of the trauma?
Well, I think it's two, that you inherit tendencies toward lower levels of dopamine and serotonin in the brain. So two of the neurotransmitters that help you focus and help you feel good. And because of the high cingulate and the worry that goes with it, they drink as a way to just sort of calm down the worry. The next type is called temporal lobe ADD, often secondary to a head injury, where one or both of the temporal lobes become low in activity along with the frontal lobes drop. So they have the frontal lobe drop, which goes along with the ADD symptoms, and then their temporal lobes, mood instability, irritability, learning, or memory issues.
So what's interesting about that one, what we see, tell me if I'm wrong on this, is that can often show up later because of head trauma.
Right.
Right.
And, you know, my first case of temporal lobe ADD was this 10-year-old boy, Christopher, who attacked another child at school. And he had been diagnosed with ADD. He'd been put on Ritalin, then put on another medicine for ADD called Psylar. They both made him worse. Actually, one of them he started to hallucinate on. And when I saw him, he'd been in therapy for a couple of years. But when I scanned him, he had low activity in his left temporal lobe and his frontal lobes dropped. And so I treated the temporal lobes with an anti-seizure medication and then medicine for the ADD, and it just transformed him. I mean, he went from being sort of a bad boy, always in trouble, clearly headed to jail or to a residential treatment center. I mean, his life was going down the wrong road. And then on the right treatment, he was literally transformed. He did well in school. His behavior was consistent. And the thing I loved, the psychiatrists were blaming his mother for his bad behavior, which has been
we always get the blame.
Common. And his mother looked so much better as Christopher's behavior was better and more stable.
But what I want to point out with that is, so a lot of these kids and young adults who are playing football, and they were good people, you know, law-abiding citizens, and all of a sudden they're getting in trouble and going to jail.
Right, and nobody thinks about that it could be ADD.
They're hurting their temporal lobes.
Induced by trauma, and they have this temporal lobe type. So in the big NFL study we did at Amen Clinics, very common, that type. The next type I described, type 5, is what's called limbic ADD. It's where their emotional brain works too hard. Their frontal lobes are low at rest and they stay low when they concentrate. So it looks like a combination of ADD and depression. And what we find is that stimulants usually make them sadder. When they come off the stimulants, they rebound in a negative way, they get tearful, they're more negative, and that on stimulating antidepressants like Wellbutrin, or from a supplement standpoint, SAMe, they just do so much better. It's just the right thing for them. And then I think it was 1997, I described type 6, which is called the Ring of Fire, which I'm looking at all these ADD kids and their brains aren't low in activity, they're high in activity, and stimulants make them worse 80% of the time. So that's Christine's son, one of your best friends, Jarrett, who just had tried thing after thing after thing and it didn't work, and it's because his brain worked too hard, was not low in activity. And they look like they have classic ADHD times 3. I mean, they're very hyperactive, very impulsive, too many thoughts.
It was sad because he couldn't, he never got invited to play dates, and he couldn't really be around younger children because people were afraid he was going to hurt them.
Well, and a really, good-looking, smart kid, but very troubled. And on the right treatment, which for him ended up being supplements, he...
Honor roll.
Honor roll. For
Crazy. He
years.
was popular, honor roll. Girls liked him. It was just a radical transformation in that kid's life.
And then when I revised Healing ADD recently, I added type 7, which is called anxious ADD. I'd seen it for a long time and I saw them go together and I said, okay, it's really its own type where they have the ADD symptoms, short attention span, but not for everything, for things that are new, novel, highly stimulating or frightening, distractibility, disorganization. But they're anxious. They won't get up in front of a class to give a talk because their mind goes blank. Remember, the harder they try, the worse it gets. So they tend to be anxious and they predict the worst, often have a lot of physical stress symptoms, headaches, tummy aches, and so on. So knowing your type can be very helpful. In anxious ADD, we see an area called the basal ganglia deep in the brain. They work too hard, but again, when people try to concentrate, their frontal lobes drop.
So I want to point something out, and we talked about it in the first video. I did not believe in ADD, not by a long shot, when I met you. And
you were so opinionated.
Just a little bit. So I'm a very intense person. And as a trauma nurse, I was pretty successful, had done well in school, and when I realized, I actually do have ADD, but how come I'm successful? It doesn't make sense to me. I just never realized how hard I was actually working at it and that I actually wasn't meeting my potential. Just because I was, pretty successful doesn't mean that I couldn't be doing better. And that's what I discovered, and it didn't have to be that hard. So that was really fun. But what's interesting is that I didn't have the classic symptoms. So I had some of the classic symptoms, but when you think of the classic symptoms of procrastinating, always showing up late, never following through, that is not me. And that's why I didn't believe in it. So...
But disorganized?
Yeah,
and
true. But
distracted?
True. But the thing is like...
And
so
you had to be in love with something. This is a really important point. You had to be in love with someone, with something, in order to pay attention. And this is what fools people about ADD. People go, well, I can pay attention if I'm interested. But so ADD is not a disorder of all attention. It's a disorder of regular routine, everyday attention, like homework, schoolwork, paperwork, chores, for things you love, for things that are new, novel,
or exciting,
highly interesting, or frightening. People with ADD can pay attention just fine. It's things that have their own intrinsic dopamine, or that chemical that gets us up and going. And so that's why they tend to be excitement-seeking, drama-driven. They focus on negative thoughts because negative thoughts stimulate them. And so that's just such an important point because, I've a lot of kids, they get all C's, D's, and F's, except they have one A. And that A may have been they loved the teacher or they loved the subject.
Right.
It's just this sort of erratic attention that, and it messes up teenagers because teenagers go, I can pay attention if I'm interested. And as soon as you hear, if I'm interested, you should ask those other questions.
So I just wanted to point that out. It may not be all of those symptoms, so I don't procrastinate, I'm not late, I follow through, can do really well. And so you want to ask yourself the bigger picture. Like, what has it been costing me for some of the habits that I may have? And could I be living up to my potential? Could I be doing better? Or is it affecting my child's life? You want to be thinking more globally here.
Well, and let's just take a minute and talk about some of the myths and misconceptions about ADD. So the
Well,
first
that's
one,
what threw me off.
well, the first one is try harder. If only you tried harder, you would do better. And what we saw in our scans, in fact, the harder they try, the worse it gets, because what happens to their frontal lobes is when they try to concentrate, their brain drops rather than activate. That's what it does in our healthy group. And because it drops, it's hard for them to stay with something unless they love it.
Well, and one of the things, so my mom has ADD from hell. Like, I'm not kidding. ADD, like classic ADD. And so I grew up with a lot of drama and stuff going on in my life. I didn't really believe in ADD. I didn't really understand what it was costing me and what the classic symptoms were.
You were just mad at her.
All the time. Well, I had to be the mom. So I had to grow up really responsible.
And there was actually some bitterness that sort of stayed with you.
Because of that lack of responsibility that I grew up with. But she was really smart. Okay, so, and that's one of the reasons she didn't believe in it. I didn't think she had it because...
Although she was in trouble all the time in school, right? So she grew up in a Catholic school. There was lots of drama and chaos.
There was, but she was super smart. And when I look at her life, I'm like, okay, she was smart. She worked really hard. She taught me this incredible work ethic. So I had a hard time at first understanding. But when I really understood it, I'm like, oh my gosh, the drama and chaos in my life. She dropped out of high school. So it just started to really fit.
She's married multiple times.
So what I want to point out, though, is it has nothing to do with intelligence. My mom is very successful.
Not one thing. ADD has not one thing. They're bright,
right?
Like your mom, really bright people.
Extremely successful.
There are people who aren't. I mean, who really struggle with IQ. It's not related to IQ at all.
Right.
But she, very bright and very successful, but had this massive. And that's what happens with a lot of people. They have to work so hard. And your uncle also has ADD.
Now, he was a different story. He didn't succeed in his life.
But they worked together, and they fought all the time. And so when we met...
Oh my gosh, it was so funny.
You remember that? So she would always complain about him. He would always complain about her. I scanned them both and treated them both based on their types. And all of a sudden, we stopped.
Well, it was funny. I get this phone call, and he says to me, oh my God, your mom is so much better. And then she calls and she's like, your uncle is so much better.
And there was less drama at work. So if you're working with people who have ADD, you have to know who's the excitement-seeking, drama-driven person who's always noticing what's wrong about other people. It's pretty interesting how it can negatively impact work. Now, what a lot of people don't know is a lot of CEOs of corporations have ADD. Now, they succeed if they have someone who organizes them. The next myth is that ADD is a disorder of hyperactive boys. Boys are actually diagnosed 5 times more than girls, but because girls don't have the inattentive type, that they often are not diagnosed. So girls have this a lot more than boys have.
Right, they just don't get in trouble as much, and so they're not drawing as much attention to themselves. So.
Right. Another myth is that everybody outgrows ADD by the time they're 12 or 13, and they tend to outgrow the hyperactivity, but they may not outgrow the restlessness, the impulsivity problems, the attentional or organizational.
And the excitement seeking, which is where relationships get in trouble. So we see a lot of people with sex addictions and things like that, and it causes a lot of trouble in relationships.
Well, one of the ways I diagnose teenage girls is I look at the patterns of their relationships. So they're always sort of this excitement seeking. So there's excitement in falling in love, so they fall in love a lot. And then as the relationship becomes more routine, there's excitement in stirring up trouble, so they begin to complain and look and find the negative about their partner. So there's excitement in fighting, and then that gets boring, so then there's excitement in breaking up. And so what you see in ADD relationship patterns is lots of falling in love, lots of fighting, lots of breaking up. And that's just so hard on your system. If you've noticed that about you getting help, and next time we're going to actually talk about, well, what are the steps that it really takes to overcome ADD or healing ADD, you want to stay with us. Another myth is ADD is a fad.
Right.
ADD's new. They didn't hear about ADD 30 years ago. Well, in fact, that's a myth. ADD was first described around 1900 by a pediatrician who talked about kids with short attention spans who are hyperactive and very impulsive. I think he called them constitutionally incorrigible, which is not true. It's a medical issue, just like if you need glasses, that's a medical issue. But it's not new. It's not a fad,
I think these were
and it's not going away.
I think these were the kids that got beaten a lot a long time ago.
They certainly were.
Right.
ADD is in fact increasing in the population. It has increased about 400% since 1990. Now, part of that may be better education, but with our lousy diets and being...
Don't get me started on the food at school.
Well, we're going to talk about that in the next video. But with our health, as obesity's gone up, so has ADD, because the food that makes you fat also makes you inattentive. So we're going to talk about that. And the last myth is people with ADD aren't that smart. And as we talked about with your mother, it's clearly not true. There are some incredibly intelligent people. In fact, one of my favorite stories is I saw this truck driver who came to see us, and he saved his money so he could come to Amen Clinics. And when we scanned him, it was so clear. He had untreated ADD his whole life. When he tried to concentrate, his brain dropped in activity. And I went to get him in the waiting room, and I saw him drawing. And he was a magical artist. I'm like, wow, that is just beautiful. I said, have you ever thought about doing that professionally? He said, people have actually hired me, but I couldn't finish. So I was never making any money. So I needed to drive a truck. And in my mind, I went, we can fix that. And after I saw his brain, I knew we could fix that. So when I treated him, just like the way we're going to talk about, targeted to his brain, all of a sudden, he got work. And now makes over $100,000 a year and works for Disney.
That's great.
I mean, the story of transformation is incredible. So I want you to ask yourself, what has ADD cost you in your life and in your relationships, at work, with your children, with your health? And if you could focus better, if you had better impulse control, if you made better decisions, what would that mean in your life? Next time, we're going to give you the tools it really takes to be on the path to healing ADD. If your life was what you really dream it would be, what would that be for you?